Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Finance Committee, the Yarmouth Finance Committee meeting of February 19th, 2025. This will be a hybrid meeting, so this meeting will be recorded to assist in the preparation of minutes. We will require roll call votes on all motions. And again, I did send out to the committee as part of our discussion that this is it's not a public hearing, not really a strategy question. We're going to dig into the financial details. We are inviting the public to attend the March 4th public hearing when all of the budgets will be presented to the select board and the school boards will be there. So they are the people who set policies. Our job is to review the data and make sure that we make a good recommendation to the town meeting. I would ask also that people who would like to speak raise their hands to assist in the, especially online, to assist in the generation of the meeting minutes. And at this point, I do require a roll call vote to establish a quorum. But I also have to read the official notice. So excuse me just 1 second. This is to formally advise that is required by Massachusetts General Law, Chapters 30A, Sections 18 to 25, and pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, the Act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law on June 16, 2021, and as extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. The Yarmouth Finance Committee will hold a public meeting on Wednesday, February 19th, 2025 at 6 p.m. in Conference Room A in Yarmouth Town Hall. The public is welcome to attend either in person or via the alternative access provided below. I would also again, the public will be invited to offer comments at the outset of the meeting, but once public comments are closed, I may recognize the member from the public, but I'm not required to at this time. Roll call vote. Alyssa.
Here.
Nate. Aye. Mr. Harding.
Here.
George Perkins.
Got confused there for a minute.
George.
Here.
John.
Here.
Raphael.
Here.
I am here as well. We have a quorum of 7-0. Public comment. Is there any public comment tonight? Do we have anybody in the audience? Okay. Hearing none, we'll close public comment. I believe we do not have any transfers.
Nope.
Okay, so we can move directly to discussion of the Cape Cod Tech FY26 budget. And again, I'd like to invite the superintendent of Cape Cod Tech, Robert Sanborn, Dr. Robert Sanborn, to share his presentation with us. And we will follow that with a more detailed review of the line items.
It's on my desk.
And while the presentation is being brought up, I would like to publicly acknowledge the great support that the district, the superintendents of both of the districts have been providing. There's been a lot of background meetings, both in some cases joint meetings with the town of Dennis's finance committees. This has probably been the most transparent, open school budget process I think I've been involved in. So with that being said, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's going to start let's go to the second slide. Thank you very much. This work started in April with my business administrator, Aaron Orcutt, and we kind of share the duties because we have 12 towns. She starts with our staff and our department heads and administration to set an initial budget. And then that goes before this finance subcommittee in October. And our work ended in January of this year. And the school committee was presented with this budget in January, and they'll be voting in February. So I want to thank the work from Mr. Tullio Michaud, Yarmouth, Michaud, and then Steph Galazzi from Orleans. Moving to the next slide, just looking at enrollment. If you just go up a little, thank you so much.
Down here.
Yeah, there we go. We have a 19 student increase. However, the town of Yarmouth has decreased by 5 students this particular year. That has impact on both the capital and the operating assessment for the town of Yarmouth. So if you go to the next slide, it really gives you a sense, can't really see that very well. But 28.5% of our district is now from Barnstable, and then Yarmouth is second with 20.6%. And if you go to the next slide, it's kind of a history, which you can see it much better. And since 21, where Yarmouth was at 137, climbed to 149 in 24, and then has been going down a good amount the last couple of years, down to 140 for FY26 budget, for the FY26 budget. Go forward. So the budget I'm presenting this evening is a 5.68% increase over FY25, $993,000 in total. I can't believe I'm presenting a 5.68 budget, but the situation, a confluence of events and inflation, and I'll get into it deeper, but last 2 years have been relatively challenging, as you can see. Prior to that, I think we've, and I think even with the budgets I'm presenting this evening, good stewards of the taxpayers' money. But the last 2 years, very challenging to get down. You see in 24, 3.86, and before that, really, we've always been below 3. So I'm sure you're hearing that from other people, but I just wanted to state that. So if you go to the next slide. This budget is funded from 3 sources, but primarily it's from the 12 towns, like Yarmouth being one of them. And 13 million, almost $14 million comes from assessments to the 12 towns to fund the budget for this year. 4.2 million, or almost 4.3 from state aid. And that comes in 2 sources. That's Chapter 70 and Chapter 71, which you're familiar with at DY as well. Transportation reimbursement and state aid. So local revenue, we're contributing significantly less this year, and that's because of the state of our E&D account, which has gone down significantly over the last 3 years. If you look at the line item budget, really quick on that revenue page, just you can see that we devoted 23, 600,000, 600,000 in 24, and in 25 this fiscal year we're contributing 750. That has eaten into our E&D, so we've substantially decreased that out of necessity for FY26. So that's one of the reasons that the local share has gone down significantly. Okay. Go to the next page. It's more of a history of those 3 sources in the operating budget. And in a couple of those years, we also gave back money to towns. The one time it was with interest on the building project, the monies from the building project, we gave that back to the towns. But on I want to say 2 other occasions, there were givebacks mid-year where the amount of assessments we had asked for, we did not bill for. We decreased by different sums in different years, and 23, 24, I think 25. Sorry, not 25, 23 and 24. If you go to the next page, it's just a graphical look at the operating budget, which is up significantly the last 2 years. But you see assessments for the most part, well, they're up significantly as well. They had been pretty steady. I think that was because we were bolstering it with the E&D money that I referenced before. With that decreasing, that changes the equation. So that's the funding of this budget. This is where the money goes and what it's used for. And the second most important people in our building are our teachers, the ones that are in front of our students, who are number 1. And so 35% of this budget goes to them in the form of salaries. Obviously, there are salaries spread throughout this, through some of these other categories as well. But you see that insurance, both insurance benefits and also plant and operations are two of the bigger categories after the teacher's salaries. We did settle for 25, 26, and 27 on a 2.5%, 3.25%, 3.25% COLA. But there's a lot of other things that occurred in those negotiations, dropping steps and such as that, so that the overall impact was significantly higher than just 2.5, 3.25, 3.25. But those were the COLAs. So the next page really just is a table showing that pie chart. And those are percentages of the overall budget you see, similar to the previous pie chart. Going to the next page, we're kind of folding things together now, where salaries are brought together in all one category, as well as benefits. You see that really the salaries didn't change much as an overall portion, actually went down by a little bit. So did as an overall percentage of the budget. One thing with benefits, that doesn't mean health insurance went down. It just means we made the decision to devote significantly less money to OPEB, and OPEB falls in that benefits category. So don't come away saying the benefits went down. It's really our contribution to benefits, and I'll discuss OPEB a little more, which is of course other post-employment benefits for primarily health and dental for our retirees. But you see materials and services went up 0.5% as an overall percentage of the budget. The building's warranties are pretty much non-existent anymore, and service contracts are proliferating on the different systems throughout the building. So that's part of it. Inflation. If you've gone to buy anything, building products, we have plumbing, we have electrical, we have HVAC. All those products have gone up significantly. The supplies that fund those programs also have gone up. With regard to transportation, that's gone up the most, and that's bad news in 26, but should be good going forward after this for the next 5 years. We did a 5-year fixed contract, which as we have always done with transportation, but we are absorbing the overall increase in 1 year. So it was a 19% increase overall, but that number will be relatively steady for the next 4 years after this one. So I said several things hit this year. That's an example. Those are just a couple of things. Those are the 3 drivers: materials and services, transportation, and then the general insurance on the bottom. You see the significant increase there as well, and that's primarily property and liability coverages. We also had under budgeted the previous year by a decent amount, which we didn't see coming in that year. So it has a little bit of a 2-year increase component to it, but it'll be more clear in the next slide. We did decrease our capital by a tiny bit as well. Our building improvement in a clip. So going to the next, you can see those drivers, I think, better, where the change for materials and services was 11 point, almost 12%. You see the 19% of transportation. And you see utilities and heating spiked a bit, but that general insurance number going up 35% in 1 year. So those 4 categories up 5.99, and then we did decrease capital to get down to a 5.68% overall increase in this budget. So one last slide with regards to the budget, and I'd stop there if there's any questions. So we're just folding up even more. Salaries and benefits went up a tiny bit as an overall percentage, but so they account for 78%, 78.5%. Materials, followed by materials and service. Operating budget. So I was going to stop there first. For any questions on the operating budget?
Quick question. What are a couple of the items, big ticket items under your capital requirements?
So those are going to the last 4 line items in the line item budget. That's building improvement, new equipment for our programming, replacement equipment, and then technology and software. So Last four line items are at the bottom of our budget. And that's what we consider capital.
And how does that, is that lumpy? Have you, I mean, any catastrophic failures, any things that?
No.
Is that pretty?
No catastrophic traffic failures. We've had, the building project is over. We have closed it out with regard to the MSBA. We still have yet to have our final school building committee, but we did get our money back.
Okay.
Took forever. The punch list was tough, and there's still things we're concerned about and still conversing with our general contractor, but not something that's driving any of those categories that you're talking about.
So what's the temperature of your GC as far as addressing the punch list and?
Well, the biggest bone of contention, and Nate may remember this, the front walkway. We have a walkway that goes down the spine of our parking lots, if you've been to our, and it's just unacceptable, and we've been fighting over it since the beginning. So I did get a somewhat encouraging email recently that I send a reminder every once in a while to say, how's that thing on the walkway going? Then I talked to my colleagues who have the same architect. So every time they walk into a meeting, what's going on with Cape Cod Tech's walkway? And so that's three other schools saying that to them. So between those things, we're starting to get some ground moving.
Good. So they're getting worn out from north, south, east and west, but no
Yes.
lawyers are involved yet.
No lawyers are.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Saving that fee.
Good. Thank you. Anything else on the operating budget?
I think I would also like to bring up a point you and I talked about the other day. Part of there's something else behind the bus number.
Yeah.
They're going electric.
Yeah.
And you might want to just share that.
Yeah, so although I've seen some headlines that might
Yeah.
cast that in doubt,
Yeah.
we have a third party, Cape Destinations. We do not operate our own buses, first of all. And we just went out to bid this year, and as I said, we got a 5-year contract. And we did have some savings over, because we were expecting 25% increase, and we settled in at 9 over 5 years. But the winning bidder, which was ultimately the only bidder, was Cape Destinations that got a grant for electric buses. And then you mentioned the charging stations, that's their grant, not Cape Cod Tech's grant. We have a solar canopy that we're considering, but the charging stations are all associated with the grant that Cape Destinations got. It was kind of under our name because because it's on our property, but it's their grant and their charging stations, which will help to charge the buses when they do get here. So, yeah.
So are you, I'm trying to figure out, when Richard and I were talking about it, I was kind of a little bit concerned. So are you simply, is the school simply the host of this program, or what's your liability with respect to operating, maintaining the buses and?
The only obligation we have is to pay that number that you saw. And we also have diesel Cape Destinations has diesel backups for the first about year and a half.
Okay.
Full. So we have 11 buses and there'll be 11 diesels. They will start to phase those out as inevitably there's going to be bumps in the road.
Sure.
With electric buses. So and then there could be a supply problem too. I'm hearing things about grants being clawed back. I have not heard anything that pertains to Cape Destinations yet, but anything could happen. But that's their issue, not, I mean, we'll have to deal with them, but it's going to be ultimately their issue.
Good.
Yep.
Are you required, sorry, we're not there yet. Are you required to offer busing for all students?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that outside of there's a mile and a half or something.
Okay.
And almost all of our students end up being that far away.
Right.
In fact, you were remarking when we met the other day that it is perhaps a very high percentage of your students actually
Yeah.
use buses, in part because of the range. So they have an hour to get from E-Town or an hour to get from
Actually,
Mashpee.
it's a little more than that, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It's quite a commitment for students coming from that distance.
Mhm.
So just so I understand, so you just pay, sorry, you just pay that busing company,
Correct.
like a flat fee
Yes,
per year based on
correct. On 11
pickup
buses,
students, so.
11 routes. And the only other thing is if fuel goes out of control, there's a fuel escalation charge.
So the savings is like as if it's just a new contract,
Correct.
regardless of it.
Well, the
where
saving,
that savings is coming from on.
savings is probably the
Right.
wrong term to use. We just didn't have as big an increase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we did have a 19% increase, but we were expecting a 25.
But it's just the contract that
Mhm.
they're giving the school.
Correct.
Mhm.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay, so if you could go to the next slide, thank you. Believe it or not, we're in the 7th year of the capital debt on the building
Mhm.
project. And you see this year, it's 2,073,000. That's district-wide or 5 million, 5.5 million for the entire district. So if you just go to and you see it's a declining schedule. If you go to the next slide, see the capital for Yarmouth, it's down on the bottom at 11,42,732.
And that's a straight percentage of.
Yeah, this is totally based upon student enrollment.
Mhm.
So that's, I'm assuming it's the overall debt is down because of the declining debt schedule, but then you're down even a little bit more, I think,
Yep.
because of the decrease in students. Go to the next, you'll see the operating assessment, and I think you also saw a decrease there because of the loss of students. It's a 2.687842 for Yarmouth. And then the next slide just puts them together. Total assessment for the town of Yarmouth, 3,830,574. And that's to fund the debt and also the operating budget. And then I just wanted to touch a little bit on the next slide on OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits. I mentioned that we went from, we had a schedule. We had moved it up to $300,000 per year to go into the Plymouth OPEB, County OPEB Trust for the purpose of trying to fund the currently unfunded liability of OPEB. So our latest audit had that accrued liability at 17 million. We have more than that in the bank today, but as of the time we did this, we have 3.1 million in assets in our account at OPEB, at Plymouth County OPEB. There is a misnomer there. We do now have 90,000 devoted in FY26 in this budget. So when you look at the insurances area, you'll see a 90,000. It's like it got cut off, but we are covering about 18% of our overall unfunded liability right now. That's at net position, it's 18.01.
Which puts you high on the list of people who have that level of reserve.
Yeah,
Right.
so that's why we made the decision, rather than impacting staff in an increasing enrollment situation, we did lower our commitment. Yeah. Now we are 2 years ahead of our 28-year schedule, which is also contingent on Barnstable County sunsetting, which is supposed to sunset in 2037 or 8. And we would start devoting that money to this too. It would be accelerated in the plan. This is a bit of a step back, but the returns we've had in the OPEB trust have allowed us to do this at this point. So, and my formal remarks.
So Dr. Sanborn also handed out some additional supplemental information, which I'd like to refer to committee to. 2 parts as we start looking ahead. You have. So one of the observations was that the Yarmouth component of the total district students has been declining. And so one of the things that Dr. Sanborn has been able to provide is a detailed breakdown that shows when the freshman class is going to be rolling through. And so looking at the numbers, and again, there's lots of variables that go into it, but one of our largest classes is going to be graduating this year. So it is possible that we will actually see a further decline in the total enrollment from Yarmouth.
But with the caveat that the 49 was about an outlier when they were freshmen, and
You can always have an outlier.
and we also we may be going to a lottery, right? Which I
Yeah.
don't even know what the impact of that's going to be yet.
Yeah.
Also, school has provided additional information related to the number of participants in their health insurance policy, they do a 65-35 split on insurance. Your total staffing is
About 127.
127, of which about 70, roughly 70 are teachers. So, and then what was the other thing? They also provided detail on the technology that is used by the students. And so if you take a quick look there, maybe you want to describe the,
I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was 90 Windows machines. There's 700 Chromebooks, 65 smart boards.
no, not that one, that one.
I got it right. 50 to 60 Macs, mostly concentrated in our art programs, design and visual communications. And every freshman gets a Chromebook. So that's why the significant amount there. So that's a snapshot of the technology. And that's all purchased out of that. I mentioned the last 4 line items. There's one line item for technology. And that's where that's come from.
So with that, I think we are ready to dig into the line items.
Okay.
But if everybody would turn to the detailed packages, unless there are any other questions.
I do.
Yes, please. I've,
Raphael,
so I'm looking at your slide 8, the student enrollment trend,
Yep.
and this sheet right here.
Yeah, now that's a history of only Yarmouth.
Right. So, and maybe I'm getting too far into the weeds. So student enrollment, that's a beginning of the year picture.
So the student enrollment is October 1. So
Okay, so let's pick fiscal year 21, just as
yep,
to keep things easy. So of the 137 that enrolled in FY 21, what number would you say, plus minus, are going to actually go through and graduate?
so I think you had a 49 there, and they're going to graduate at the end of the year. So that, and I think they're at 42. That gives you a sample of what it's like.
Okay,
Okay, so there's going to be
That's-
attrition. There's going to be mobility. There's going to be students who don't get their first choice shop or second choice shop or even third choice shop. And they say, this isn't for me, or they just say it's not for me. So that can be 2% a year, maybe.
That's-
Approximately.
Okay.
Yeah.
thank
It's a
you.
ballpark. Yes.
okay, so refer everybody to the detailed package, Sanborn has already discussed the revenue side. I don't think unless there's any big issues. The rest of the slides are organized along the lines of the function codes provided by the state. So, from a high level standpoint, the top lines are district-wide numbers. So you see the superintendent, secretary, those also are things like their descriptions and so on. So that's that line. The next line is the HR and HR accounts payable, accounts receivable types of numbers. So the bookkeepers as well as the payroll people. And then, so I don't, is there any questions? I'm walking through it, but
I can take you through if you like.
yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so the next one is district-wide academic and vocational. We have 7 administrators. So the superintendent or principal, assistant principal, an academic coordinator, a technical coordinator, curriculum and instruction, and a special needs administrators. I think that's 7. So that's what that category, several of them are in there. And then you get to the principal's office, which picks up the principal and the assistant principal and the expenses associated with that area, which we just call total building leadership. I'm on line 50. Going to line 56, building technology. We have 2 people in our technology department, a network engineer, and then a data specialist, as that's become just a bear. So the next is teaching. So all the way from auto collision down to literacy code. is down line 85. That's instruction and teaching. And then, and you see the associated increases. Speech and language is next. We actually finally found a speech and language specialist for the first time, and you know what I'm talking about. So-
Speech and language, meaning a speech pathologist.
Pathologist, yeah. So substitutes are next. That's how much we budget for substitutes. Next is paraprofessionals. You see primarily that's special needs aides with an FTE of 6. A librarian who is not full-time, but is 0.84. So that's the reason for the decrease there. And then professional development, reimbursement. Some of these are contractual obligations, those 4 areas. Professional development, bring her in there. Then we get into texts and subscriptions for all of the programming. Next is supplies for all of the programming. Other instructional field trips, and those, I mean, there's a good amount of field trips are programming, but we have Future Farmers of America, and we also have Skills USA, which allows the kids to compete within their technical programming. So there's also a club account that also supplements that cost because it's considerably higher than the number you see budgeted
You
there.
should also add that they keep winning competitions, so they wind up going to further.
Chris will apprise you at town
Excellent.
meeting,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then a little bit on tutoring and credit recovery. Some of that gets covered by grants. After school support, and then we transition into the guidance suite, where we have 4, really 3, because one of our guidance persons is totally an admissions counselor and community outreach. So although that job may start changing if the lottery gets imposed. And then we also have an adjustment counselor, which is also, it's called an at-risk counselor, but a licensed social worker. So that's that area. Psychological services, you know, that we do have that decreasing, but we also have a grant with Gosnold. And so along with the at-risk counselor, Gosnold, and then psychological services that we farm out to the Cape Cod Collaborative, we have some of those are generated by IEPs, but then we do have a lot of support for the kids for mental health, which has been huge, a huge need. Moving to the nurses suite, we do have 2 nurses since COVID, and we have been able to keep them on. We've looked at that as a way to potentially save money, but we have to bring an aide on, and really it's not a huge savings and having 2 nurses down there has been, you know, coverage wise and overall wellness, health and wellness for our students. It's really worked out well. So we were able to maintain that after COVID. Now you see the transportation line. That's that big increase we talked about. And that number will stay relatively, the 881,100, that number will remain the same for the 4 years. Late transportation could be plus or minus, and sometimes homeless or special needs transportation occurs. Like that $78,000 for special needs transportation is 1 student that we have to transport to and from school in a vehicle other than the 11 buses that are going to our school.
What percentage of the students benefit from the transportation?
I would say around 60%, 60 to 65%. Athletics is going through off the charts in participation. So there's significant increases there, and we are running at a significant deficit this particular fiscal year, and because of that participation. So we have a no policy for freshmen, which freshmen really went into sports this year. So that's another area that is driving some of the cost increase. Then we have other student activities, our advisors and student activities budget. We did have the town of Harwich wanted us to absorb a much more significant portion of our school resource officer, which I would never give that up. So we did increase that from 20,000, which was kind of like a token payment to the town of Harwich, where we're now covering a percentage of the officers' full salary. So that's what that area is. That's why it's up so much. Custodial is, a lot of that's contractual. There's 6 custodians that are at the top. There was significant increases in our unit E, maintenance and custodial. Collective bargaining agreement. Although the COLAs remained the same, there was a lot of other things that happened at the collective bargaining at the table that increased the salaries of custodians. And the same is true for food service, and the same is true for paraprofessionals.
Context, the building is 222,000 square feet, so that works out to a couple dollars a square foot.
So gas is up about 9%. We are not currently under contract for gas, but we do have a contract, and it's referenced on the sheet I gave you for electricity, which is next, the biggest utilities. And then moving down to the ground, you see that student wages line. Our horticulture students help maintain the ground. Our horticulture department helps maintain the grounds. We do have one grounds, but then students also go up on co-op. We have some co-op students on site on our school. By the way, right now we have 130 students out on co-op in companies every other 2 weeks for 11th and 12th graders.
How many?
130. Last year we had 150. We went this year. So then we go to maintenance of the building. A lot of the next 2 categories are where those service contracts, along with salaries, and the cost of goods. And the emergency services, by the way, is overtime. So that category is, and then the maintenance of equipment line had huge increases because of the maintenance contract I referenced earlier. We did luck out on a small increase in Barnstable County of 2.7%. That's that number that we transitioned to a OPEB if it was sudden set. And then we get into insurances, line 61 to 274 on the last page. And you can see that OPEB obligation on line 270 going from 300 to 90. So that's what I was talking about earlier.
If you go back, by the way, to FY21, it was 550 on OPEB, so that was one of the years they.
That's when we had a surplus.
Right.
And we would also often vote an additional amount towards it. Postage meter, small lease expense that we have. And then finally, those 4 line items I talked about under capital, that's that decrease that I showed on the charts that are in my formal remarks. When you get down to you see the operating total, but you also have the debt there. We do have the ability to have 1.2 million. You see that in the box on the very bottom, E&D allowed. And as I said, we're forecast to be at 533 for 24. That's not a certified number, but so we have a good amount of room to build back our E&D, and we're in a position where we need to do that now.
So, wow.
I have a quick question. I did not see food services on here and you mentioned it. Did it?
Great, that's a great question. There's school lunch is free,
Okay,
and it has been financially a very positive. We used to have a subsidy in the under food services but we haven't subsidized the program for 5 or 6 years now.
okay,
So, and they have, all food service programs have a revolving fund. And right now, it's extremely healthy. So it's covering all the costs, all the salary costs, not benefits.
okay, got it. Thank you.
But yeah, there used to be a line item, but it didn't go back to 22. So we take it out of there.
I'd like to have,
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's really related to that. Everybody gets a free lunch because the reimbursements from state and federal, and our student percentage, all those things put together, it's a real financial, because they get a lot of free food too. So that the inputs aren't significantly lower. So, been a really financially for years we were supplementing, and now we haven't had to do it for many years now.
Okay, that's great. So the only implication of that though is that if we dig into the insurance and the benefits, like that's.
They're in
all-
there.
They're in there.
They're in there.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think if everybody could take a quick look at page 3, lines 74 through 80. So, again, I just started, there's a quick point of reference. We're talking almost 700 students. And you'll see here sort of these are your 4 classrooms. And so you and I had talked a little bit about, the staffing model that you're using for that.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit different because of the co-op and other programs. So you might want to just take a couple of minutes to talk, because I think, English is obviously 4 years required.
Yep. So what we do is we have 180 days of math and English in 9th and 10th grade, which takes them away from technical time, but requires that's why you see more English teachers and math teachers than we have social studies and science. Science, we do 180 days in 9th grade. Now, a lot of this was, well, 2 things. We really believe that you need to have the academic skills coupled with the technical skills, that those things are both equally important. But MCAS was the driver also of that. So where that's going, love to tell you if I could. But we may be looking at those models of 180 days down the road. But that's why there's more math. There's 1 more math and 1 more science, or 1 more English teacher.
What's your average,
Class size.
yeah,
So it's really like, I think it's around 11 to 1 when you take into account shop and academics.
what's the academic?
Academics is significantly
Yeah.
higher. It's going to be 15 to 20 to 24.
What's your percent of special needs students?
We are now down to about 18%. We used to be 32%. So there's been a significant decrease in the last several years.
Any reason for that?
It's become highly competitive to get into the school. We have a wait list. And as I said, the state is considering us imposing a lottery on all of us across the state. And one of the reasons is that students with disabilities, ELL, and minority students are not getting into vocational schools that are commensurate with the surrounding districts. We're still relatively reflective of our district as a whole. But in other pockets but I am seeing decreases over the last 4 or 5 years because of the new building. I think the popularity of technical education, the cost of college education, all these things have come together to make technical education more popular. But it's also put a spotlight on this issue that some students are being put on the sidelines, from marginalized populations. So we've done a lot of work trying to get the word to those populations. But we currently have an admissions policy that has attendance in it, has grades, it has discipline. Actually, it doesn't really have discipline anymore, but it has a personal interview as well and a guidance counselor recommendation that most likely will all be changing next year. But those things, some would argue, have some of those students with disabilities in particular, also seeing that they didn't apply as much, which was another that I couldn't answer why. It could be that they feel as though they couldn't get in, but as I said, probably 5, 6 years ago, we had 32% special needs, and that's changed drastically. Which I don't feel good about when I say that, because I think our education often is what speaks to those students, where they can get out of their seat, they can do things with their hands, and not every student's generalizing, but that's something that I'd like. Hopefully a lottery changes that.
Just as a footnote, well, rate volume variance is relevant here too. So the budget is up 5.68%. But if you look at it as a the longer term, the the cost per student. So if you think about, they've had a significant increase in the number of students, volume, against to educate. So they're on a rate volume variance, their per pupil expenditure has only been going up about 2.89% over the 4 years that are here, which is not bad.
Bob, last year, how many graduated?
Approximately 160.
Okay, and if I remember correctly, 30, some of them got Mary Gale Adams full 4-year scholarships to any Massachusetts school. So that's 34 out of 130, what's that? 35%?
Mhm.
Got a full, they were educated well enough, they got a full 4-year ride. That's pretty good out of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't share that tonight, but we have a graduate follow-up study that's currently, the most recent one's done right now, but you know, we've always been about a 35, 65 school, and 35 go to college. I don't know what free college education, community college education. That could change significantly.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of our students, many of our students choose to go to Cape Cod Community College, which was financially, great to begin with, and now it could be, it's free, so. And we really haven't seen the impact of that yet.
You also should mention the MCAS. I think that'd be a significant.
Yeah, I think that the work that our curriculum director, along with the English, math, and science teachers, and the devotion of upfront time, that 180 days in 9th and 10th grade. We 2 years ago, we were a school of recognition, and this past year, we had very, very good results in comparison to our colleagues.
So I would encourage you, one of the things, so I'm giving you a free opinion after being in engineering, construction, manufacturing for over 30 years. So I would encourage you not to compromise the basic skills, your basic core curriculum or curricula, like communications, English, reading comprehension, communication skills, that type of thing. Because I work with a lot of brilliant people that can't write an email. Okay, so if you can't get what's in here out to your audience or on paper
Yep.
or to the rest of the world, then what's in here is trapped.
Yep.
So,
It's in all, I work in professional services and unfortunately that happens as well. So I don't know if that's specific to industry.
I'll just sort of, Mr. Harding and Mr. Perkins have been notably silent, and you have not put your hands up, so I just want to make sure that you are good to go. I think we are actually a few minutes behind my theoretical, and you know me.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure, John Anderson.
So, student count 680, right? You're limited to what the facility can teaching and budgets and all that, right? Do you have any sense of what that number would be if there were no limits?
Well, there's over 100 kids on the wait list, so. Yeah. If we were able to develop the land that we're talking about over on 374 Main Street, we may be able to get another 100 kids over 4 years. 120, but I'm saying it's 26 of September, but it's not looking that way right now, but I'm still working on it.
I think I would share, so I think the presentations that the Cape Cod Tech provide have been incredibly comprehensive. And again, unless there are any other questions, I think we can thank Dr. Sandborn.
Thank you.
Oh, but Mr. Okay.
one real, again, just probably me getting way too in the weeds. Is there anything particularly challenging about grade 11? I noticed that in 23 and 24, you lost from grade 10 to 11, you lost 11 in 23 and 9 in 24. Is that
Yeah, you go over here.
Am I just reading too much into that or?
So where are you going again?
So your end of year 23
Yeah,
from grade 10 to 11, if I'm reading you went from 30 to 41.
No,
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 you'd have
no.
to go down to the next one, 29.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, I wanted to make sure I wasn't,
Yep, I know what you're.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Greeley?
Thank you.
30 goes to
I-
29.
I'm obviously
Yeah.
one of the Yarmouth representatives to the school committee. And I have to say to you that the presentation that you've seen today wasn't just done as a one-on for today, that this is the kind of information, the kinds of things that are done by our administrators, basically regularly to all of us on the school committee and the presentations and things like that. I'm a retired school administrator, so I know what's involved in doing it, but it is very, very impressive process in which we're kept very, very informed. And so it isn't just that they've put this suddenly together for you tonight to impress you or something. This is how the operations and the function of that school take place, and the monitoring and the really looking very carefully at both the quality of the education, but also the financial implications for the communities. And so I just need to commend them all, from Dr. Sanborn, Dr. Aaron, through the entire crew, and the work that every single teacher and everything has to do in terms of contributing to the information to develop the budgets and the feedback we get regularly every month. So I just need to say that. Thank
And
you.
we will have another bite at the apple at the select board meeting on March 4th.
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
By the way, Dr. Sanborn has offered sort of given me a rain check for my tour of the facility, and I would
We
encourage.
can extend that to the whole committee if you'd like.
Yeah,
It's well worth it. It's an impressive place.
Thank you. Okay.
Dr. Smith.
It's you.
I'm sorry, we're.
Take care. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Very much.
All right, Gary, you know everybody around the table.
Not sure.
Okay. Why don't you, everybody can enter? No.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nathan Ladley.
John Anderson?
Rafael Gutierrez.
And online, Bob Harding and George Perkins.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
As we did with Dr. Sanborn, we're going to go through the presentation to begin with, and then we will go into the gory details.
All right, and I emailed you something like in the middle of the day today, which. I don't-
Jennifer has that.
All right, perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, awesome, super. I brought paper copies in
I have
case.
black.
All right, so am I driving? Somebody else driving?
She's right.
Yeah,
All right,
just tell me when
perfect.
you want to switch
Yeah,
the slides.
super.
and I'll-
Next slide. So thank you very much for having me. The budget is largely driven by our strategic plan. So we're launching a new strategic plan as a school district. For those who may or may not be aware, I'm entering my second year as the superintendent for the district. The committee was patient with me last year, gave me last year to really get to know the school district, spend the year really learning about its strengths and its areas for growth, and spending that year really getting to know the district. By about April last year, I presented everything that I had learned, and then used that to launch. Largely spent a good chunk of the summer developing the 5-year plan, which has much more detail in it. But these are the 3 big strategic objectives for the district, where we're focusing on student achievement, which is a big area for growth for us. You may have seen the Cape Cod Times article that came out that really didn't do us much justice, which is actually okay, because I like to see you can't move forward until you first identify where you are. So that really kind of highlighted our areas for growth around student achievement in the aggregate. But then when you also really drill into who we're serving and who we're not serving, what you find there's a lot of gaps for achievement when you slice our data in a bunch of different ways. So not only are we looking to raise the overall achievement, but then there's certain groups of students who need to raise the student achievement for. So that's really the strategic objective is focused on that. And we're doing it through raising the quality of instruction for all students, and then through professional learning at multiple levels throughout the district, making sure we're using our data informed ways, and setting high expectations for all students, and then monitoring our improvement strategy. The next piece is around developing consistent district-wide systems to support our effectiveness as an organization. I've essentially been trying to sum this one up as how we do quote unquote business as a school district. We are roughly, give or take, about 630 employees as a school district. I've been using comparisons. Cape Cod 5 is 577 employees. Nantucket Airlines is 700 employees. So we're right about in the middle of those two organizations, like size wise. But there are a lot of things from a business side, right? And a lot of people like myself came up as educators and don't think about actually running the business of a school. And there's just a lot of things that I've learned in my first year about how we run as a quote unquote business that could be a lot more efficient. So including things like standard operating procedures, how we do things from payroll to processing, to setting. Last year, we were forced to, because we were in a really difficult budget situation, on how we even establish our staffing ratios, et cetera, just having clear and consistent processes. And there's a lot more for us to do consistently along those lines. And then the last bit is developing a long-term, the district has done a bunch of studies and has a bunch of information in several places for its facilities. And then there's a bunch of other places where we don't. And then there is no really long-term capital plan. So what do we need to replace the next 5 years, the next 10 years? What is the priority for all those things? What is it going to cost? What can we do with our funding mechanisms? We're going to need to work with our partners. What's a Yarmouth project? What's a Dennis project? What's a combined project? And working and having that all laid out to be able to work collaboratively on those things. So we have a responsibility of developing that plan and then working with everybody on executing that plan. So that's all part of this. And then you'll see some of those elements in the budget as we start to move forward. So this is just the timeline on where we are in this process. We can zip right past this slide. And then, you know, the big things, which fortunately, as we've moved forward, we've actually filled in a lot of these numbers. There was a lot of stuff that we didn't have as we were building the budget. We was coming out of last year, I've really tried to start the budgeting process a lot earlier, but there's so many bits of information that, especially on the revenue side, that we don't get until that third Wednesday in January. But we were able to get all this, which ultimately landed us with about $17 million in state revenue and almost $5 million in assessments. So you do the math there, it's roughly ends up being about 13 million in total revenue to the district as a net positive. Next slide. And some more detailed on another slide. And then the major factors that are influencing the FY26 budget are implementing those strategic priorities, our contractual obligations, which we're, right there. So it's okay. So we're fortunate enough to have all of our contracts are settled this year. We're not negotiating with anybody. All of our service contracts are settled, like transportation, custodial, et cetera. All of our contracted services, we largely know what those are. And then you will see, I have a couple slides that talk about out of district student special education costs, and that's been a big driver. And then always a driver. We're in the business, as Dr. Sanborn mentioned, students are our number one priority. They drive our need. And then we have level funded most of our supply lines, at least at the school level, as we move forward into this year. All right, moving forward. So talking from a staffing level, just give some historical data. So moving on to the next slide. So this is the staffing levels going back about 10 years. The last year we had about a 30, I think it was 35 and a half, if I remember the number off the top of my head, staffing reduction. So this just shows sort of that history over time, where it came from, and how we stand now, going into currently in FY25. Moving on to the next slide. This shows us compared to other districts. So how we stand, as I get the argument from both sides. I'll get the argument that we're understaffed. And I'll get the argument that we're still overstaffed. And this kind of shows that largely we're just about right. So this is, the Department of Ed has a tool called DART, which allows you to analyze your district compared to other districts, based upon two different factors. One is based upon similar demographics and other is based upon relative wealth. Relative wealth is a factor that is, based upon property value and, the mean household income. And then it gives you a total of, I think it's like 10 different, other school districts. So they would have been really noisy if I put all 20 up here. So what I did is then I grabbed the school districts that are relative wealth districts and similar demographic districts, but then we're also similar enrollment districts. So those are the ones that are all up here. So you'll see ones up there, for example, Barnstable is similar demographics and around the similar enrollment as us. Same for Falmouth, but Marblehead is a similar relative wealth district, not a similar demographic district, but again, around similar enrollment. There were other ones that the enrollment was completely different, either significantly larger than us or significantly smaller than us. And both present different unique challenges.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
So on the wealth piece, so like Marblehead and Westwood, I'm assuming are comparisons on the wealth end.
Yeah.
Is that like income, property value?
It's two factors, property value and then the median income in the community. And, I don't know what algorithm they're using to weigh one versus the other and.
Seems off to me.
Yeah, so for example, it says Marblehead's relative wealth is 164.3%. DY's relative wealth is 154.8%. Let's see, Watertown relative wealth 171.1%. So higher, but within the same ballpark, right? And I would say the biggest factor probably driving is probably property value, if I had to guess.
It must be property
Yeah.
or they should look at, and I'm going totally off script here, but they should look at income of the households with actual students.
Yeah.
In the school.
But it's why it's why I put both up there, because regardless of which group you look at, and then these are staffing per 100 students. That's what the ratios all are, right? And you can see, again, there's some that are higher than us and some that are lower than us as ratios. But again, I put a little star where DY is in all these charts. But you can see we're not outlandishly higher or outlandishly lower than any other district. The state average is in there among all of them as well. So you can see, like, from a staffing perspective, and then it's, teachers are that top left-hand corner, paraprofessionals, and you can just see it's all the different groups. We're well within the mean for all the different staffing groupings. All right, moving on. So next is sort of how is evolving student need affecting us. So I know Richard showed you sort of a 20-year look back. I didn't go back 20 years, but I did go back about 12 years. And we've definitely had declining enrollment, except for the last 5 years or so. And we've seen a reverse in that trend, where we've definitely seen, we've got more kids in the district now than we have in the last 10 years. And that's been steadily increasing post-COVID. They were at 30, I checked the day before vacation, we were at 3,120 kids in the district. And what you'll see is a slight variance between what you get off the district profiles page. And that's because the Department of Ed counts preschool kids as half a kid because they come half a day. They're full bodies for us. So I count them as full kids. So we have
They're shorter.
Yeah, we have roughly 120 preschoolers in the district. We have preschool programs at ME Small and preschool programs at Ezra Baker, roughly 60 to 65 at each school. So again, they'll count those 120 to 130 kids as 65-ish kids. I count them as 120. Because all of them show up. Moving on. And then the profile of the students have changed over the same period of time. So this high needs moniker is something the Department Ed has created. But you see that this percentage of high needs students has grown over the same period of time, and then it's kind of leveled off roughly around 2/3 of the students over the last 4 to 5 years. And then if you move to the next slide, it shows you that, oh yeah, sorry.
Mr.
Just define high needs.
That's the slide.
Bingo. So high needs, the state makes up of these 4 groups of students. So I then broke down how is the percentage of those 4 groups of students changed over time. So high needs is made up of students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And that term has changed it's been at different times called low income, different times been called socioeconomically disadvantaged. But it's always the same population of kids.
I can't see color that well.
Yeah.
Which one is this?
So the very top line is the socioeconomically disadvantaged.
Thank you.
Yep. And then so if I start on the left-hand side, so then the next one that starts at 16% is special education. For everybody else in the room, that's red. Then the next one down, which starts at 11%, I think, is yellow. That's English, first language, not English. And then the one that is the lowest one on the left-hand side that starts at 8% is English language learners. So special education for us as a district has largely remained the same. It started at 16%. It's gone as high as 20% and has leveled off at around 17%. So some variance, but largely it stays in that 17% average for us as a district, largely over the 20%. The things that have moved for us as a district is the students who are economically disadvantaged. 20 years ago, it was roughly 40% of the kids. It dipped down to 30, but it's got up to as high as 60% and has kind of leveled off around 55% of our kids. And then the 2 populations that we've seen grow additionally are the students who are English language learners. That's moved from 8% to now almost 20%. It's 18% of the student body, so almost 1 out of every 5 kids. And then the students whose first language is not English, from whatever that was, 10% to this year, 29, almost 30% of our student body.
So you could have people in multiple categories, which is why the overall is about 2/3.
And that's, if we don't mind going back real quick to the overall slide. Is it, in your opinion, is it coincidence that we've jumped 10 points since COVID?
Probably not. No, because I'd have to go back and look at the socioeconomic number. That could have been a big driver.
That was-
Yeah, it was
that
a big
was-
driver. Yeah.
Some of that could
in
also
that
be
year.
formula. In order to be eligible for the programs, you have to have SNAP, be part of mass care.
Yeah, any one of the social service and they've done a better, used to have to apply for a lot of benefits now, or at least we used to have to sort of gather some of the data and report it to the state. Now a lot of it actually comes
From the state.
from the state, especially the socioeconomic disadvantage. So anybody who receives a social benefit. So if you receive food stamps, if you receive a SNAP benefit, if you receive housing assistant, all that stuff is coordinated somewhere in data in the background. And then that comes back to us in this field.
Okay. So this is state data.
Yeah.
This is not
This is not our
local.
data.
Got
No,
it.
the only
Thank
one,
you.
well, I had updated the 24, 25 data because we do have it internally. Except for the economically disadvantaged one, I took a guess. I used our free and reduced number. But as Dr. Sanborn mentioned, lunch is free now. So kids don't have to apply for free and reduced lunch like they used to. So like everybody gets a free lunch and free breakfast. So our number is a little depressed. There are other reasons why people still apply for that. There are other benefits they get inside the school district. So I had a slightly lower number, but the state just released the numbers. So I readjusted it, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago. But everything else we have internally, because it's a mix between that number comes from the state, but the other ones we keep internally and report out to the state.
Thank you.
Melissa,
Quick question. I'm not familiar with first language, not English. What impacts would that have on a school budget?
That one is mostly about our need to communicate with not necessarily, so a student can be in, it depends upon if they're an active English learner. So if they're, because a student can be both, right? So your first language cannot be English, and you can be bilingual and not need English language learner services.
Okay,
So that from a student perspective, very little, just
Mhm.
they're a student who's bilingual. I wish I was bilingual. But if they're a student who's still learning English, so they're an English learner, puts them in that other bucket as well, then they require specific instruction. And there's a whole bunch of requirements that go with that. And
Got
one of
it.
those things ends up being extra staffing as well. And training for the staff, other staff. So that ends up being a budgetary impact. But for the students whose first language is not English, often the impact on the budget is for our requirements to communicate with their family. So
okay,
everything has to be translated in home language.
Got
Any
it.
district communication, any school communication, any, IEP meetings, any parent conferences, et cetera, requires translation service. So that's either staffing on our end or outsourcing in order to get it done.
got it. Thank you.
And then just, again, this doesn't really necessarily have a budget impact. It's just an interesting to see how the demographics change the district over time. And then this is the out of district tuitions. So some students in our special education programs, we aren't able to meet their need with our special education programming inside the district. We have to send them to either the Cape Cod Collaborative School, which is housed here in Yarmouth, which is the least costly option, is the best option, both from a cost perspective and quite frankly for the students, because it's only going, right next door. But some students that program isn't the right fit, and then we have to send them over the next options over the bridge. Next closest place is Plymouth. And often that isn't the best option. So that's a 45-minute ride one way for a kid. So it's just, I'll get in a whole philosophical bent, but which for us as a district, we need to work better. One of our goals, sort of going back to number 2, is to look systematically on how we might be able to build some better programs inside the district. But the costs of out of district tuition is the blue part of the graph. The green is the number of kids. The blue is the cost of the placement, and the orange is the cost of the transportation to get the child to and from. And so what we've seen is not only a cost in the tuitions have driven up, there was a 14% spike in the cost of out of district tuition, which the state regulates that. And they hit us with a 14% spike between 22 and 23, which we still haven't recovered from across the state. And then on top of that, transportation has gotten very, very expensive. And we get doubly hit by that on the Cape, in that they're really, I say it kind of out of jest, but I kind of mean it, because it would help us as school districts on here on the Cape. If anybody's looking for a retirement hustle, open up a transportation company here on the Cape. Because often we have a significant number of students that we have to hire a transportation vendor out of like New Bedford. They drive onto the Cape to pick up our student, drive them off Cape, and then do the same thing in reverse in the afternoon. And they're charging us for all that driving around. And we're required to get the kid there and back, but there's so little transportation options on the Cape. So it's part of the factor that's driving that. And this is just in special education. I know Mr. Simon and I have had the conversation. We're also required to do similar under McKinney-Vento for students who are unhoused. So we currently have 170 students that are unhoused. Now, not all of them are traveling that distance. They might be traveling shorter distances between us, and not all of them have to leave our school district. But if a student is, let's say they were a DY student loses their housing, finds temporary respite housing in Barnstable, or temporary respite housing in Bourne. The family has the option under McKinney-Vento to remain in their school of origin, which let's say it was at Station Avenue Elementary School. Or let's say they've got more than one child, and one's at Station Avenue Elementary School and one's at DY Intermediate. Those are two different start times. And so now we have to work with, let's say it was Falmouth, to arrange transportation from wherever they're living to the two different schools at the two different start times, at the two different end times. We split the cost, but again, you're talking anywhere from $300 a day to the most expensive one we're paying right now is like $650 a day, split two-way. It still adds up pretty quickly. So those costs have escalated pretty quickly for us.
No, that's unrelated to,
Unrelated to that.
unrelated to that.
That's correct.
Mr. Anderson,
So 45 students for like 6.6 million.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have any sense of like what that would cost the district to add the teachers and the whatever, equipment or
Yeah,
to keep those students in district?
I don't, and it's one of the things that I'm analyzing Yeah. And there'll always be a population of students that we're not able to meet their needs. They have like a very specific medical need or a significant, behavioral need that we just can't manage inside the district. But my belief is, and you'll see when we get to the proposals, we have a proposal for to create a program at the lower elementary, which is designed to stop, quite frankly, some students who've left that we think if we'd had the right program in place at a lower age, we would have stopped them from leaving the district later.
What does your gut tell you? Is it 25%, 50%, 75%?
I think it's not 75%, but it's probably 25% of the students that are out.
Fair enough.
You
Yeah,
can keep.
keep back, yeah. And then, yeah,
and the Cape as a whole, by the way, just put this in context, is about 228 students. So again, we're about 20% of the total. Barnstable is the next biggest component. So again, the more potentially we can work together, maybe we'll have better success as well.
yeah, and another layer to this, so the Cape Cod Collaborative has worked under sort of one model, and it's had one director that's worked under that model, and that director retired, and there's a new director who just started. And I think that new director is interested in looking at other models. Other collaboratives work with building programs like where the collaborative builds the program in the school. So like DY might host, or Barnstable might host a collaborative based program in a DY school. So we might have kids from Barnstable and Falmouth that the collaborative is running in a DY school, but we're benefiting from it. So is Barnstable. So is, yeah. So again, other collaboratives operate that way. Ours just hasn't traditionally, but there's some interest in at least exploring a new possibility. And if that's the case, then we might be able to build new programs, not just DY building it, but us working together as a region to build different type programs that we haven't been able to have before.
And that would lower your student price, right?
Yeah, it would lower the number of kids that are going over the bridge, again, because it's much less expensive for
I
us. to
mean,
send.
if you're pulling in Barnstable and you're pulling in Falmouth or somebody all into the same room, it should lower, hopefully. the
Yeah.
cost.
Well, and quite frankly, it's, to send a student to the collaborative, rough numbers, it's somewhere between $45,000 to $50,000. Most of the places over the bridge are 2, 3, sometimes 4 times that price just in the tuition.
So
Thank you.
So this is the McKinney-Vento. I meant to update this slide and I totally forgot. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is FY 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25. I apologize for not updating the slide. So the green are the costs in those years. So FY 25 is just what we've spent so far this year. It is not, obviously, we're only in February. And actually, that was as of January 31st, in 25. So and then we do get some reimbursement, but as you can see, it's kind of sporadic, and it lags by like a year and change. So what you see in FY 23, that's actually tied back to what was spent in FY 22. What you see in FY 24 is tied back to what was spent in 23. So it's not like a direct correlation. Essentially, it's the state has a certain bucket of money that they're able to allocate every given year, and then they just divide it among whatever they get for claims in that. And as you might imagine, given sort of what's been going on all across the entire state, there's been a significant rise in the number of McKinney-Vento claims from all districts. So there has just been a little bit less money to go around for all districts, which may be why we got less of a percentage of our claim last year as well. And I don't know I can't forecast what it's going to be for this year, but it's definitely an increasing cost for us. We believe we're going to be able to absorb it in this year, but it is something that we're definitely keeping a close eye on as we go forward. All right, so then last year we were largely in cut down and survival mode, but we are trying to support the strategic plan moving forward. So we do have some prioritized requests going into FY 26. So move on to the next slide. So we did create a rubric for prioritizing the requests. So this is the rubric here. Largely, a 4 is either it's an emergency need, something's broken, falling apart, it's legally required, or it's contractually obligated by policy, by a contract agreement, or address a safety hazard. And then a 3 is it meets the strategic plan. It's something that's past due maintenance wise or an anticipated safety need. And I'm going to skip the 2s and the 3s, 2s and the 1s, because we didn't fund any of the 2s and the 1s.
So moving
on. Yeah. So the 4s and the 3s. So the 4s, so we had an MOA with our union, which required us to fund the winter percussion. These are just stipends for these positions that were in place for a winter guard and a winter percussion. We have an amazing band program that runs, actually, I just saw them practicing right now, or earlier today, rather. And it's just to ensure that we're paying the person who's actually doing that work. So those are 2 stipended positions. Above that is the robotics. We've had a longstanding robotics program in our high school. And every year, the robotics equipment has to get replaced, and it always costs us $10,000, and we've never actually budgeted for where that money's going to come from. We always scratch and scrounge. So that's actually just putting in a line item in there for that equipment. The game officials, the MIAA establishes what the game official rates are going to be. And that went up by, I forget what the exact percentage increase was going to be, but the MIAA sent us a letter saying the game officials are going up by, I think it was 5% increase. So that's in there for there. And then based upon the staffing ratios that we established last year, the Margaret East Small School is seeing an increase in students, and those are all in the 2nd grade, and those students are all going to be moving up to 3rd grade next year, which will require an additional teacher at that grade level. And then to support, you saw there, we've had an increase in students whose first language is not English. We've had an increase in students whose English language learner, and it's the only position, or the only part of my whole district that does not have somebody leading that whole department. I use the analogy of saying, like, if the town were to start the wastewater project without a wastewater supervisor. I have 1 out of every 4 kids in my district, or 1 out of every 5 kids in my district is an English learner. I have 1 out of every almost 3 kids in my district's first language is not English, and I don't have anybody supervising, leading, directing that program. And that's why that request is there, supports our first strategic objective. And then the second is a program that we've been using, actually helped to craft the strategic plan. We've used it multiple times to get feedback from the community. It's a basically a souped up survey tool, which allows us to get feedback from the community. We'll be using it. We used it when we launched our strategic plan. We'll be using it when we launch the capital plan to get it uses AI powered tools to help take large amounts of survey data and give us feedback back. The next two on the ArcSed training and the data platform, we're going into negotiations starting next year. This gives us, oftentimes, I don't know if anybody's been involved in negotiations, but the associations come with a lot of comparative data, and oftentimes we're left not having comparative data. But a couple years ago, this group, ArcSed, retired superintendent, started working and collecting all the contracts from across the state and keeping them updated, and so that now as school teams, we can go in and say, well, you said that, that this neighboring district's got a 6% increase and they gave everybody 20 days of free FMLA coverage, but we actually have all this comparative data that says, no, that's not actually what everybody got. Everybody got 2%, whatever. So we can actually, it gives us all that comparative data for very short money. And then our foreign language textbooks at the high school, we've been working on replacing them. Last year we did Spanish. This year we're working to do French, so that they're not 25 years old. And then we have some staff transfers. All those positions on the bottom there are changes to get some additional staffing without getting additional staffing. They're all FTE transfers. So moving staffing positions to get some things that the principals see as priorities by changing. So for example, the first one there, there's a health PE teacher that retired. The principal of that school, there's 3 health PE teachers. He doesn't see a need for 3 health PE teachers anymore. He's going to change the rotation because he believes more important for the kids to have another STEM class. So instead the kids will go from, I forget how exactly he changed the schedule and the rotation, but there'll be 1 less PE rotation and they'll have a STEM block instead. The same, that because of the reduction in enrollment moving up to the 4th grade at that same building, they're going to put a math interventionist in as a teacher is retiring from that 4th grade position. And the same at the Baker School. So those are all the additions. And then on the next slide, these were all the priority 2 and 1s that came up, but none of these were funded. So they're just a list of recommendations that came up from all the department heads, but ultimately did not go into the budget. So these was roughly $450,000 in recommendations that came up from principals, department head, like my facilities directors, et cetera, that we ultimately did not put forward to, where we didn't recommend to the school committee, and then they ultimately did not move forward to the budget. I mean, they haven't voted yet, so they could surprise me with something, but they haven't surprised me. They haven't sent any signals that they're going to make any changes. So this is how it all shakes out overall in the high level function codes. It comes out as a 4.49 overall increase to the school budget. So I beat Bob.
We're going to go through the line by line shortly. So don't memorize this chart.
Yeah. And then debt service, again, there's 1 more year at the high school, and then the rest is of the DY intermediate school. Oh, and I should have started with, and please, a little grace. I lost my business administrator. I'm working on an interim. So I'm doing, I'm doing my best to get all caught up as quickly and as fast as I can. All right, next.
John's a good guy, though.
He is a good guy, but he's also been 8 days on the job. All right, so and this is just how that last slide all breaks out by on a pie chart to sort of just show where the bulk of it goes into instruction and largely into all fixed costs. Pupil services, transportation, maintenance and utilities does take up, but a lot of that is actually, looks a little misleading because that includes the salaries for the maintenance and the utilities folks. benefits and insurance, so as you sort of work your way around the pie, there's very little there that is actually discretionary that we have much flex with once you start taking out the salaries and et cetera. All right, next slide. All right, then we get down to the assessment. So this is state aid. State aid has been good to us since the implementation of the Student Opportunity Act. It was kind of, if you go to the next slide, it shows it graphically. So you can see we had a big bump once the Student Opportunity Act started in 23, another big bump in 24, kind of slowed down a little bit last year, but then we got another big bump this year, which has been very beneficial to the school district.
And the envy of the rest of the Cape.
Yes, and the envy of the rest of the Cape. This is the foundation enrollment, which is a portion of how we get to the ultimate assessment. We knew this already coming in. It's based upon a 5-year rolling average. This year would be from FY 21 to 25. And it's, again, if you go to the next slide, you'll see it's been slowly creeping towards Yarmouth. Year over year, it just gets a little bit further towards Yarmouth. Will that change in the future? I don't know, probably not, but at least the trends would indicate that it's going to continue to move in that direction. Now to the assessment calculation. So there's obviously a couple steps that are involved here. We have to first start by taking all the revenues off the top. So starting with Chapter 70 and our local receipts. Then is the minimum required contribution, which I do want to slow down and just take, and I have a couple things that I want to talk about when we get there. And then it's the remaining amount is done through that roughly 70-30 split at the very end. All right, so the minimum required contributions, and this was something that we talked a lot about, or I've talked to a bunch of different groups about, really trying to pause here and make sure folks really understand this piece, because while this worked to Yarmouth's benefit this year, it didn't last year, and it might not in the future. And I really want to, as often as I can, really pause here and make sure folks understand what is happening with a minimum required contribution. Now, as David was, he did a great job of always saying out loud, and I'm going to repeat out loud, both towns pay above the minimum, right? So that's the minimum required contribution isn't about making sure the towns are meeting their obligation to the school district, but it's a very important first step in how the assessment gets calculated. And if we skip past it thinking, oh, well, we pay above the minimum, we don't have to pay attention, then we're missing a very important part of how we ultimately get to the assessment. So this year, the minimum required contribution was, again, it comes from the governor's budget. So the district doesn't establish this. And is large, it goes back to sort of, we talked about that relative wealth piece. It comes from largely the same two factors. It comes from a wage adjustment factor, and it comes from the equalized valuations, which is the property evaluation. So for Dennis this year, the minimum required contribution went up 1.1 million, a little over 1.1 million. And for Yarmouth, it went up 1.6 million. But on a percentage basis, for Dennis, that was an 8.442% increase. And for Yarmouth, that was a 6.125% increase. So it was not proportional. It was weighed more. So the bottom of the seesaw, the first step in the assessment, was already bigger towards Dennis. So the amount of money already being asked at the very first step of the equation weighed more towards Dennis. So then if we move to the next slide. So then the next step in the puzzle was, okay, so how much ever was left then had to be divided by that 30 point blah, 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 to 69 point blah, 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 blah amount is then divided. And then when you average all of that out, that's where you get to the overall percentage increase. So it comes out to Dennis having a 4.557% assessment increase from last year, and Yarmouth ended up with a 3.180% increase from last year. But that's because of the fact that it was disproportionate in the very beginning. So if we scroll down another slide, this is what it looks like from a number perspective. Again, The revenue comes off the top, so we started at an roughly $80 million budget. Take out the state aid, which I said, is has been good to us, so it's 16 million and change. Local receipts, our contribution from E&D, plus I lost what else is in there. E&D and our investments and a couple other pieces gets to the total amount that are assessed at 62 million and change. And then there's that minimum required contribution. That's the first bit. But because Dennis's was so much bigger, it's already a big disproportionate chunk in the beginning. And then the remaining amount gets sorted next, and then you get to the final amounts. And then if we slide up if we move to the next slide, we can see this is the minimum required contribution history. And we can see it has not been proportionate. So last year it was, if you go to 25, it was a bigger increase for Yarmouth. Go back to 24, it was a bigger increase for Dennis. Go back to 23, it was a bigger increase for Dennis again. And if we go to the next slide, this is sort of it then tracked cumulatively over time. It tracks kind of the same as you look at it over time, but it's still, you can see a gap that it has as a cumulative percentage, it's hit Yarmouth heavier as a cumulative percentage over time. And then if I can pause there, this.
Is the handout? Yeah,
Did everybody have a copy of it?
everybody should. We handed it out, I think, earlier.
I don't know.
You don't? Here.
Yeah, I do not.
That I probably,
You probably just,
it's right here.
it's right here.
A lot of handle.
No, they got, that they have it in color.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this just shows and runs a couple of examples. So what you see in all the way on the left is last year's minimum required contribution, so the FY25. And then what you see in the green is what I just showed you, right? It's this, and there might be a dollar or two difference because of rounding differences, but it is the FY26 minimum required contribution increase. Then what that totals as you move down, what that totals. So 14 million to Dennis, 29 million to Yarmouth. What's that subtotal, which leaves a remaining amount to be assessed to both towns at 19 million and change. Then when you apply the 30.999% to Dennis and the 69 points, that gives you the 5.9 million and the 13 million. And then that gives you the total amount to be assessed, right? That's the chart that was just up there a couple of minutes ago. The other two remaining columns are, well, what if both towns what if the minimum required contribution scenario was different? So the first column where it says FY26 minimum required contribution same is what if they both went up proportionately? What if both went up by 6.1%? So you see that Dennis's minimum required contribution would have been 809,000, would have gone up by 809,000. Yarmouth would have gone up by the same amount because that's what it went up this year. And then you can watch it flow all the way down, where at the end, the difference in the percentage increases are now 3.46 and 3.70, which are still less than the overall budget increase for the district because we got so much state aid. State aid actually backfilled a lot of the percentage increase, but you see it actually evens out more of the percentage increases across the two towns. And the difference is now more got to do with the 60-30 or 70-30 split. And then the last column is, well, what if it had been inversed? What if the percentage had gone up 8.445% for Yarmouth and only 6.1% for Dennis? And then you flow that all the way down and you see Dennis would have had a assessment increase of 2.46% and Yarmouth would have had an assessment increase of 4.17%. So the minimum required contribution is a significant driver in the assessment. And I think I'm gonna just keep beating this drum as loudly and as often as I can. Because as a district, we obviously have we have fiscal responsibility and we have a lot of work to do, but I have no control over the minimum required contribution from year to year. All right, so then when it comes to debt service, as I mentioned, we have the final year on the DY High School bond. There is an outstanding, or there's a portion of the bond for the middle school, and then we're still holding on to a band because we're not as fortunate as Dr. Sanborn in that we haven't completed and we haven't closed out that new intermediate middle school. So we're still have a bond anticipation note out while we are waiting to close out that project. There's roughly, we're still about $2 million in reimbursements from the state before we take the final bond on the school. So that would be the debt service. I think that brings me to the end. Yep. I lost my slides.
Go back, just up for the bond question for a second.
Yeah.
The bond, so we issued how many millions of bonds already?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. So in that piece, so the $4 million is not is that a portion that's being divided this year?
Yeah, all of that is what's being divided, yes, because that's the bond on the high school, what has been bonded on the intermediate middle school, and what's currently in a bond anticipation note before the remaining amount.
And that's interest only?
Yes.
No.
No.
Yeah, let me just talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they had a bond anticipation note, but this year there was a principal payment due. So even though you haven't fully gone out to sell a bond for, to pay back the next, 20 years, they did make a principal payment on the band.
So that is divided proportional to that's this 30%. So that doesn't go through any minimum contribution. That
No,
just-
no.
Yeah, it's just
That was negotiated, then that's not the six, that's a
different number.
different number, yeah.
And the Yarmouth share of the debt service is $2,642,046. It's in your budget.
Right.
The assessment number is correct. I mean, the capital assessment number of the budget's correct.
Okay.
It's not an estimate. I believe.
Okay.
No.
Bob's got a question.
Bob Harding.
Yeah, so going back to the question that Jennifer asked, and I just want to follow up. What I'm reading is that the district has received a little over 42 million from the MSBA, and they just issued a $12.5 million note back in November. Or $12 million note in November to mature next year. So I'm trying to get a better sense. So you said that there's still outstanding issues with MSBA
2 million.
expenses.
Yeah, we haven't done the final closeout. We're still working on the punch list, and then we still have an issue with the fields. And until that's gonna be resolved, MSBA won't let us close out. They hold a certain percentage of the project until, and then with that, a certain amount of the reimbursement funding, and it's roughly $2 million of the remaining reimbursement until the project is totally closed out.
How are we doing in terms of change orders at the project itself?
There's very little change orders left. Like I said, the biggest sticking point is that the fields that were put in, there's a dispute. They're not draining, and there's a dispute, which is either we're currently working on a mediation, and if that doesn't resolve, we'll end up in litigation on resolving that matter.
And this is on the artificial turf.
On the artificial turf, yeah.
So is that, I wonder, because I saw a report some time ago, and I think, and I'm not speaking for Raphael because I was looking at him because he's a construction guy. But as I recall, we saw something that was at $10 million, $2 million in change orders. And I'm
That's
just,
different.
yeah,
That's
is
different.
that something different?
Yeah, no, that's different.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Bob, I think that, so I guess the real question is gonna be, as we look ahead to, sort of, is that gonna be the debt service is gonna be at the same level roughly going forward, minus the high school bond, So it's 2027.
Let me just say that the debt service is excluded debt, right? So if it goes down, depending on how they did the bonds, if it was declining principal, then that means the revenue goes down that you're raising on your tax
Right.
recap. So it's not, it's all proportionate
Yeah.
of, the revenue versus what the debt service is. I'm not quite sure when they have to bond this last outstanding, but it really depends on when they, like you said, when
And
you
what they're-
get it resolved and get the reimbursement, you don't want to start paying principal and interest back on something where you might get reimbursed.
Right. So, okay. Any other questions? Raphael?
So a quick one, back to slide 23, your pie chart 23 of 49, your overall budget breakdown by function code. You mentioned that the salaries for your maintenance staff are in that 7%, that 4,000 code?
Yeah.
So I see that, and fixed assets is the only other closest. Where are you capturing capital and facilities work?
Yeah, so
I think we're gonna go, if we go through some of the line item details, some of that should pop out.
Okay.
So, no, Bob, you can put your hand back down.
Maybe he's got another question.
No, I think I think that was his question.
I wish I
Um,
knew how to do it. Apologize. Okay.
You're good, Bob.
Okay. So if we could, unless there are some pressing questions, we can walk through the details on that this is similar format. So if you think about the presentation that the Cape Cod Tech did, so you see the same sort of organizational structure.
Right.
Okay. So I'll let you sort of,
yeah, so I mean, I don't know, like, I mean, I don't know if there are specific questions that folks have, but like, the top section is all district-wide salary expenses. The school committee expenses include, which Bob and I had a conversation around, did some digging. Those are a little out of whack relative to other school districts, but that's because of the fact that we put my executive assistant's salary is in there, and I'm not really sure why, other than it's been historically, that's where that salary line is sit. That position does serve as a recording secretary to the school committee. So my assumption is at some point in time, somebody's logic was that salary line should sit in there. Because most school committees you won't see, because school committee members don't get paid. So why you have that much number in that line? But that's because her position does sit in that line. So there's a salary tied to that line that you wouldn't normally see in other school budgets. Then there's staffing under the superintendent's office, as well as supply lines under there, assistant superintendent, same. There's one position under there. And then business and finance, it's the assistant superintendent for business and finance, plus all the other staffing positions under there. So there's the accounts payable, the benefits office, administrative assistant, et cetera. Human resources, same staffing. And then district-wide technology, it's both staffing and some of the supplies needed to run 630 staff and
well, and also the other people,
3,120. Yeah.
the other 300 people too.
And then curriculum directors, there are um, two district level curriculum directors, plus there are other staff designated under there that are stipended positions that also get funded under that position. Department heads is a stipended position, so teachers get a, classroom teachers are one position, but then department heads is a stipend that staff members receive. So that's a separate, it's coded separately in the school districts or for the Department of Ed. Principals, I think, are self-explanatory. We don't have school curriculum leaders anymore, hence not funded. Building technology is a small supply line item. And then classroom teachers, obviously a huge bulk of what we do. You'll see an increase in that line rather sizably. Part of this, Bob and I had this conversation, is realizing, and you'll see the best way to sort of look at it is to look parallel at the same time. Where's my notes? Is to look at in the 5,000 lines, you'll see
Which are 2 pages back.
2 pages down, yeah. You see the employee insurance costs. So from FY 25 budgeted to FY 26, you see like 6.5 million down to 6.4 million. And even though the health insurance costs are going up by 8%,
6.5.
yeah, 6.5%, we're actually reducing the number of we're reducing the amount, and this is because David, prior to his departure, did some auditing. So we took last year when the layoffs, David took all of it from the salary side, and none of it really from the benefits side. And then what we see when we look at some of the actuals is that we're under budgeted on the salary side and over budgeted on the benefits side. And this is his work to do some balancing on that, to bring our salaries up to where they should be to be properly budgeted, and our benefits. So even though, again, the benefits are increasing from what we're being charged on a percentage basis, we're actually reducing the request on the budgeting side in order to match what people are actually using for plans and to not be under funded in the classroom teacher line. And then, classroom teachers is one category of people. What we have to send to the department is we do have to code people appropriately. And so specialists is a different type of teacher, as are medical and therapeutic services. You see librarian, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but the Department of Ed, you have to actually code librarians separately. I don't know if that's just a legacy thing, but so they have their own line, as do paraprofessionals. We did negotiate our paraprofessionals were the lowest paid on the Cape by a fair margin. So so last year was the first year of that contract. We did a step reduction or like a step drop with them. Because last year was obviously a very difficult budget year. We didn't have much room to play with. Going into this year or next year into FY 26, we did a little bit of wage adjustment, and we'll do a little bit more wage adjustment next year. So this is us easing our way into that wage adjustment. So you see an increase definitely in that line, but
That's, just for a second. So for context, that would be similar to some of the work that we've been doing on fire and other departments. So changing the ranges or shifting the ranges so people are not maxed out.
those are all hourly salary members too, where like teachers are salaried, all the like executive staff are all salaried.
Utilities doubled.
Oh, sorry, we're jumping ahead. All right.
4130.
Okay, let's.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Let them go through all the lines.
Yeah.
Going for the throat, Nate.
Yeah, it's okay. So professional staff, like all these are largely level funded. I said, the increase in the textbooks, that was what I had up on the slide earlier.
Specifically French, right?
Yeah, French. Moving on to the next page. Instructional equipment, largely level funded. General supplies, largely level funded. Instructional services, other instructional services, again, these meet the needs of, like we have to contract certain services out to other places, and certain things that we can't pay for, and unfortunately, these costs just keep going up. Classroom instructional technology level funded, instructional software, those costs do go up, have gone up. And part of this is we worked with our technology director to, what's the word I'm looking for, to, go through his budget and balance, places where he was overfunded and under budgeted in certain places. So instructional software was one of those places where we were over expending this line for multiple years in a row. So actually bringing this line up to where it should be. Guidance counselors, again, is just another coding for staff. So, and then testing and assessments level funded, psychological services, again, another coding line for staff. Transfers to other funds not funded for multiple years. All right, school resource officers, again, we reduced that position last year, and then we're bringing it into line with what we've been charged for the two towns. Medical and health services, again, that's our nurses that we have in the buildings. Again, another just funding mechanism from the state. Transportation costs, it's two factors, one being our regular transportation service, so the big buses that you see going out every day. That's on a contract, 5% increase. We knew that number. The other one is the slide that I showed you, and trying to keep up with those costs. Athletic and intramural, this is our athletics account is partially funded through a revolving account and then partially supplemented through our general fund. So this is the portion of it that is funded partially through the general fund. And then other student activities covers a whole bunch of other things that we fund through the general budget, largely at the high school. Custodial services is a contract. We outsource our custodials. We have a long time at DY. I don't know exactly when they made that, but it's been a long time. So it's on a contract. Again, that one had an established increase. Heating, and then to your question on the utilities. So so Bob had this question and I we did some digging. So
I'm Bob, by the way.
Richard, I keep calling you Rich. I keep calling you Bob. I'm sorry, Richard.
It's all right.
I have a friend named Bob Simon. I'm sorry.
I do too. So.
Yeah. So Richard asked me about the utilities, and so we did some digging, and what happened in FY 24, well, in FY 23 as well, we didn't get a bill for the new school of all of FY 23, and for all the way up until March of FY 24. And we reached out to David to try to get his assumption. His assumption is that the general contractor was paying the bill, got the bill and paid the bill. So the actuals for FY 24 reflect, well, the rest of the district plus the intermediate school from March until June 30th of FY 24. And so these numbers reflect run rates so far for this year and are running pretty accurate for utility costs for having that building online for an entire year. But we only had, like I said, a utility bill We didn't get one for all of FY '23 for the new school and only one starting in March of FY '24. So that's why you see the actual is so far off in FY '24, because that building wasn't, we didn't get built.
Thank you.
Maintenance and grounds, you see that down a little bit, but that's just largely because we're just moving some money from grounds to buildings. And then maintenance equipment, flatline, network and telecommunications, flatline. Again, that's down, or it's down from a previous year, but that's also some of that work that I mentioned before, where we're doing some things that would have been previously sort of billed as network and networks and telecommunication as really, instructional software, and just really trying to get stuff in the right places. We have a lot more work to do in making sure things are getting built to the right places, but it's a baby step in that direction. And then retirement contributions. So we have multiple places that we have to make retirement contributions to. So one of them is we have some folks who are in Barnstable County retirement. And then the bulk of our people are in Mass Teacher retirement. Some of them are active, some of them are retired. And
those are covered at a state level.
Yep.
So that's the interesting part. So a lot of the retirement costs are self-funded by the teachers sending money, plus some money coming in from the state that goes into their pension plan. But it's not included in the district's costs.
Right. And then we have insurance, employment separation costs. We're probably going to be off in what we budgeted for FY '25, just by what we saw come in, as I mentioned before, we laid off a lot of people in, going into this year, and a lot of those people stayed on the unemployment rolls. We're self-funded on unemployment, and a lot of them stayed on a lot longer than we anticipated. But
Through the summer at least.
yeah, and into the fall longer. We anticipated the summer, but we didn't anticipate people staying on as long into the fall as they did. But we don't anticipate layoffs again, right? So at least not to that degree. We always have some people that through either us telling them they're not the right fit or for other reasons. So there'll be some costs, but so we anticipate it being remaining level funded and not having to spike it, even though we will see a spike this year. And then there's insurance costs. Like I've sort of already spoke to those a little bit. And then jumping down to private school transportation, we're required to provide transportation for St. Pius. So that is the cost for transporting for St. Pius. I don't know why the FY '24 actuals are so low. I actually just noticed that while I was sitting over here, but the other ones are more in line with consistent trend pattern. I'd have to go back and look and see why the FY '24 were so low. And then to your question around fixed assets. So this is the line here where and this was always a question I had with David. David would budget here for equipment replacement, but he would spend it in the appropriate line. So if we had, if I go back to, where did I see it? The 4210, right? Yeah, right. He would overspend that line and know that this is where it was coming from.
Sure.
And not do the adjustment in the general ledger. And we would talk about this because then we would do his quarterly reports. You'd see this big giant green line for unexpended, unencumbered funds within this line. rationale and the conversation he would have with the auditors was that the auditor said it was always best to know like where you were over budgeted and under budgeted. But then it always creates this. So I think there's a space somewhere in between, but that was his logic. But anyways, that's where it was funded. Like larger capital, like, and I don't know, everybody's always got a different definition of capital, so I don't know if that's what you meant for capital, but that's where the larger, so, you know, when the fire alarm panel went at Ezra Baker and it was on an unanticipated expense, that's where the money came, but it got charged to the appropriate 4,200.
4,000 series number.
Yeah.
So how many buildings are you responsible for under those 4,000 series numbers?
All of them.
What?
Oh, sorry. So we have five school buildings. We have the central office building, we have the wastewater treatment facility. And then those are the big ones. Then we got a couple of small outbuildings. There's the maintenance building.
Maintenance shed.
Got an observatory, got the snack, or not
It's all of the sports.
Yeah, like all the
Concessions.
concessions. Yeah, thank you. That was the
and
word I was looking for. I think that's about it. I don't think I'm missing anything.
Okay. Thank you.
And
The other, one of the other things.
Oh, no, wait, sorry.
We'll hit equipment. So one of the things, for those of us who read the report, the annual report, included in the numbers are technology for classrooms, 3,600 iPads and 1,700 other computing devices. So that's another big piece of it. If I recall, it says they are on a 6-year replacement cycle. So every year they do 1/6. So if it's 3,600, they're going to be doing 600 replacements.
When did they get an iPad?
so the fourth graders get one and the eighth graders get one. And then in COVID, they did a K-3 purchase. But and then at the end of ESSER, we just did a replacement ESSER funds for the K-3, but we don't yet have a plan for how to maintain the K-3 iPads.
Yeah, I was just sort of mentally thinking.
That replacement cycle is 4 and 8. Yeah.
So it's sort of interesting though, if you think about that many iPads with charging stations and software upgrades.
Yeah, well, and we have, and iPads changed, they've evolved. So we're having a conversation about whether we're gonna stay with iPad because the cost keeps going up and they don't support the version they're not gonna continue to support the version we have anymore, which means changing all the ports and anybody who's bought a new iPhone, right? Like, it's the same things happen with the iPads. Yeah.
So, yeah, so might potentially considering moving to Chromebooks,
They're cheaper and but with that comes its own challenges. So we have a team that's looking at it.
I think that the point there is that there's a lot going on behind the scenes to try to save money.
Yes.
We're up to tuition to other
Yep.
schools.
Yeah, so, we, stuff that, as the home public school district, we're responsible for every kid, including, if they don't come to DY. So that includes, other Massachusetts school districts, any tuition agreements we have with other school districts. In this case, a couple, and then school choice, tuition, that's, part of, what we get from the assessments. If I go all the way back to one of the initial slides, any of our students that are school choice into other public school districts, the charter school, this all comes from assessments from the state, but we do have to pay it. And then essentially comes off of the revenue. Essentially, the way we do it is it comes off that initial revenue. And then tuitions to non-public schools. So these are private school placements for students with special
Special ed.
needs. Yeah, and then collaboratives. So they are different on whether a student's going to a private special education school or they're going to a collaborative. And again, just for coding purposes. And then the very last bit is the debt service.
Okay, on the collaborative specifically, is that, how many, you said that the average cost there was about
It
45?
depends upon the
I
collaborative.
know,
This
yeah.
collaborative is roughly 45, 45 to 50.
So there's not that many kids who are collaborative,
I don't, hold on, let me see.
because I'm just sort of dividing 50 by 400, so like 8 kids.
If you give me a minute, if I think I can pull that spreadsheet up.
See, the-
Call me Bob.
Just being nice.
No, I appreciate you correcting me. I don't know how long I would have kept doing it, so.
Well, again, I don't necessarily need to slow this down for that specific item. I think, so I'd like to, so Nate, you had a specific question related to, obviously
He explained it.
they explained it, sorry.
Yep.
So I'd like to sort of give everybody a chance to, like I say, there's a lot of lines in this detail. So is there any one in particular that anybody else besides me would like to tackle?
Well, Dr. Sanborn talked about his school, that most of the warranties and service agreements and stuff like that are now running out because the school's 4 or 5 years old.
Here we are,
Here
5
we
years
are.
old.
This school, it's what, 2.5 years old?
Well,
Well, it
Start-
depends. Yeah, so we have run into some warranty things have run out for sure.
Yeah,
On the new building, yes. And some things we've strong armed to get people to come back and put warranties on stuff that just shouldn't have run out that fast.
yeah,
It, we're definitely getting to that point where it's getting harder and harder to get the vendors to come back.
so is that gonna, so that may in the future become a line item?
Yeah.
oh, yes.
Yeah, well, and so. Yes, and I guess I would say two things. One is, I think bigger picture than that is, so that the new building, the best analogy I can compare is I used to be able to, I enjoy like working on things, right? I
Yeah.
enjoy like renovating my house. I've always enjoyed like, working on my car. The last couple of cars I bought, I can still change the brakes. I can't even change the brake on my wife's car because you need a computer to release the back emergency brake,
Yeah,
right? So like everything's becoming so computerized on new cars that I can't even really work on them anymore.
yeah,
And so the same, you wouldn't believe
yeah,
how much technology is run in that building on a day-to-day basis, right?
yeah,
So, and if we're fortunate enough to continue to move forward with ME Small, we've been invited into the feasibility study and, I'm not counting my chickens before they're hatched, but if we're fortunate enough to get all the way through and the town supportive and we end up with something resembling a new building
Yeah.
for that as well, we're gonna have another building that's gonna have that same level of sophistication.
yeah,
So my point, then sort of long-winded way to answering your question, my maintenance team is gonna need to evolve.
yeah. Your maintenance team has to elevate their technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I'm gonna have a capital improvement plan, it's gonna be looking at that, maintaining both the buildings,
Yeah,
looking at a field over at the high school that is falling apart and keeping all these other buildings just alive and moving forward, that I'm gonna need somebody with I've got a great, like, fix it when it's broken guy right
yeah,
now,
yeah,
but I need a, like, project manager person and
Yeah.
a building,
Oh, yeah.
right? So like,
Yeah.
it's just gonna need to restructure the department in a way and think about what are the positions that are, really have to be a part of
You're
that.
gonna have to grow the knowledge base.
Yeah. So I think it'll be a restructuring of that department. We had a conversation around too, around grounds, you know, because one, we're having a hard time just getting grounds people in the traditional model. So we move, I've had this conversation with my facilities department. Do we long-term move to something of a model that looks more like sort of what the golf courses use with more part-time staff that come in and just get the grounds work done? We're looking at all sorts of different types of options to keep the buildings and the grounds where they need to be, but also be responsive to, you know, the needs of the Cape and the type of people we can get, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, Dr. Sanborn tonight talked about his students being out on co-op,
Yeah,
and he has a great horticultural
Yeah.
and a great plumbing group and a great HVAC group that you may be able to tap
Yeah,
into
yeah.
on a internship basis and develop not only that student, but then when that student graduates, maybe you'd have an entry-level employee.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah, no, yeah, I like that, yeah.
So, behind the scenes, Dr. Smith and I, along with the town of Dennis Finance Group, have been doing deep in the weeds. And I think sort of the note you had sent earlier today, I think sort of captured the conclusion. There's a lot of areas which Dr. Smith is looking into. And so I think there's going to be potentially future changes. Certainly, you've already alluded to the way that you would like to potentially have better alignment on budgets versus actual spending patterns. So, I mean, we could go further into this, but I'm almost tempted to say that the schools, both school districts have been incredibly responsive in providing information, digging back into it. So I don't know if we right now at this particular session, you know, but we could dig into some of those items, or would you prefer that we just sort of continue to work collaboratively with the two towns and on some of the details?
I just want to let you know that this Joe Glenn is an attendee.
Yep.
And he has his hand raised.
Oh, sure. Hey, Joe, this is Richard.
Hi, Richard, or better known as Bob.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna live that one down. Yeah.
I would have messed it up forever too after that because I was noting that. But I just wanted to let your committee know how much I appreciate your help as a town resident. This is Joe Glenn of the school committee. I'm also represent the liaison to the select board. And many of those questions that you have, I just want to let you know that myself personally, that those are the questions that I have, and I noted all of your questions, which helps me because you guys are the finance people, and you know the types of questions to ask, which help me ask the questions. I've been through Dr. Smith's and David Flynn's presentations a lot before, so I'm familiar with a lot of these numbers. But you know, there was still two questions that I had that you brought up. One was the school committee funding assessment. I was like,
Yeah.
was there I was thinking I wasn't getting 1/7 of my salary for of $135,000. And the other one was the utility question. So I thank you all for that. I just wanted to let you know that I was here and I was listening, and fantastic job, Mark and Richard.
Yeah, that's so call him Bob. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And again, the school committee is similar to the select board. They set the policies. They ultimately are the ones. So when, like we do budget transfers, which is sort of a multi-phase project. They have a similar process that they go through at the end of the year. There are a lot of additional questions, but again, I think my question would be, is there something that we can change this year? Or should we treat 2026 as a step off point for 2027 and just work even more closely than we did this past year?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll answer any questions that folks have to the best of my ability. Now, I will sort of preface that with a caveat that
You lost your institutional mind.
yeah, well, and I, as superintendent, I let my people with their expertise do their expertise, and David's expertise was here, and I lost sort of that appendage, and I've been doing my best to get caught up. So I will do my best to answer a question. If I can't, then I'll go find the answer. So I might not be able to answer it in the moment. That being said, too, I also have ideas for direction, and I see my role as setting direction. And one of the things that I know we've talked about and talked with your counterpart in Dennis is around setting budget for based upon trend. And that's going to create its own challenges in that we've identified some patterns where, some lines, looking just at this level, like some lines are going to be significantly higher next year and significantly lower next year if we're going to try to actualize things. So it's going to be just sort of understanding that if we do that work, all of a sudden we're going to see FY 25 actuals or FY 25 or FY 26 requests to FY 27 requests. They're going to be in certain places, because if that's the purpose, is to try to get things based upon, and I'll have to think about that from how to present that standpoint.
Yeah. Well, when we have one of the school committee members on this, so maybe, part of what Dr. Smith is referencing is it's hard, anytime you do a restatement, if you will, similar to what you would do if you had a merger and acquisition, to normalize the past sometimes so that you can explain to people that it's, so all of a sudden school committee expenses went down by, 100,000 because it's in this line. Again, difficult, I think, without sort of the pre-education to tell people that this is coming. Could be a little bit tricky this year. And I'm thinking, particularly town meeting. So that's another reason to not kick the can down the road, but to have a plan to collaborate, to move to that, where it's more, where it's, it actually can be seen, would be a thought.
Yeah, and I don't have the bandwidth
To do this.
to do it right now, just because I've only got a part-time person right now. And if I'm being 100% honest, so we've got an assistant treasurer position whose job is to move the money. One of the main functions is to move the money right before payroll. That person just went on leave. So I spent 2 hours before coming over to this meeting to make sure that we were going to be able to move the funds to make payroll on Friday. And then I didn't bounce 630 checks.
No pressure.
That was my biggest concern before coming over here today. So we did clean that one up. That's all cleaned up. We got the it's the passwords to the kingdom or whatever. So we were able to do that. So
It's not password?
no, it's not password. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 either. But so anyways, I think to your point, and I think it's more even just from a political acumen standpoint, right? I think to try to make that shift right now, I think would just be a little too much. Like if I started all of a sudden monkeying with all these, the school committee's about to vote at their next meeting. I think if I all of a sudden started changed all the account lines on them, it wouldn't be fair to the school committee either.
But Joe, get ready for next year.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Other concerns of the committee, questions?
No questions, just it was a good conversation between the points that Nate brought up and, regarding we've had similar conversations with Jeff and the DPU of outsourcing, contracting, low tech, low stress stuff that you shouldn't have to worry about so that you can redirect to high tech stuff, energy management systems, building management systems, and your core competencies, which is teaching kids and taking care of students. So versus, the analogy would be trying to run a full service maintenance garage. Well, that's not what DPU is there for. They're to streets, roads, infrastructure, safety, et cetera, not repairing vehicles. So just want to reiterate that point. Support you there.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you. We have been, like I say, I, at the outset of this meeting, I spoke about the incredible effort that's been going on behind the scenes to increase transparency, increase collaboration, and I think it will pay big dividends in the upcoming years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
It is.
Really good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, and again, continuing, we do have a little bit of homework. Everybody should have gotten, I gotta find my place in the stack here. I'll probably be touching base with you a little bit later on.
Yeah, any questions, feel free to, I am going on vacation the next 2 days. So if I don't answer you the next 2 days, I'm in Vermont.
Well, somebody,
Yeah, this is vacation week.
well, that's why I said that we conveniently scheduled the schools in the middle of vacation week. How we did that, I don't know.
Oh, and I don't know if, I don't want to show you the names, but so that's all Cape Cod Collaborative right there. So what is that, like a dozen maybe?
We'll talk. That's again, that's a nudge. That's just me being me.
Yeah.
What? I gotta find the right page now.
I knew I had it, I just never found it.
Yes. So let's finish up our agenda as soon as did someone steal my agenda? Oh, no, it's right here.
And next year, Dr. Sanborn goes second.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Be safe.
Okay, actually, I hate to say this, we are
We're late.
5 minutes.
Bedtime.
Jennifer,
No update.
well, other than you're busy as hell finalizing the warrant. Yeah, there will be some changes. There's gonna be, obviously, she's got to reintegrate all of the changes that we're talking about into the warrant, which we should be able to see hopefully next week. Okay, we didn't get the February 5th minutes, so we did get the 22nd, the January 22nd meeting on, has everybody had a chance to read it?
I just got home at 5:30, so.
Okay, you haven't read it.
I haven't read it.
Everybody else?
Reading it now.
Yeah,
These jobs just get in the way of finance committee,
yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty normal, so be glad to entertain any edits, but otherwise, if there's anybody online who wants to make any modifications?
Nope.
I'll move it.
Okay, Mr. Anderson would move to approve.
I'll second.
Raphael. All in favor, and for those who haven't read it, you can abstain if you would like to.
I will abstain. Abstain.
Mr. Harding,
Aye.
Mr. Perkins,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Raphael, and I am an aye as well, so we have a 6-0-1 abstaining. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have our upcoming meeting on the 26th. And so I guess the only other thing, Mr. Perkins has the pen right now. Do you have everything that you need, sir?
I think I would answer yes. I didn't hear from most of the committee on what their topics were, but I think that my notes were adequate, and I'd be on that part of the draft anyway, so. If somebody
so-
wants to send them to me, fine.
I think we're good on that. Also, some of it's going to be reflected. I can ask Jackie to see if she can maybe up the timeframe on the 12th meetings, the minutes from the 12th for that. So our deliverables, so by the public hearing, we have to have, and again, these are all technical things, but transmittal letter, which is the final votes on the warrant, a draft of our warrant article recommendations, and the presentation that we're going to make at the public hearing. Now, again, those are, there's a lot of it that's boilerplate, so I don't anticipate it's going to be a problem. So next meeting, again, we'll be continuing the work to hit that deadline.
Did you just change my deadline to the following week?
No,
All right.
no, you got time. Yeah, but
George, excuse me, did George send something? Because I never received anything from you, George. No, I didn't send anything. I asked you guys for your notes. You weren't there, Bob. Oh, okay. So, yeah.
I think we're good though. Does anybody else on the committee have any other concerns that they want to raise? Otherwise,
Those are two excellent presentations, by the way.
They were.
Very organized, very informative.
D-Wise was a lot better than I've ever seen in 10 years.
Nice.
Good to hear.
well, again, the amount of collaboration that is going on and sharing is,
His was better than I've ever seen the whole time I've been on the committee.
I think we should actually add that to what George is writing.
George, you hear that?
I did.
And I would just I mean, the schools for sure, but everybody, the book, Jennifer's work,
Oh, yeah.
just everything A to Z. This is like night and day better than last year.
Yeah.
Good. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll move it.
Mr. Perkins,
Second.
Mr. Anderson, roll call vote.
Aye.
Nate,
Right.
Bob,
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
I'm an aye as well, 7-0 at,
late.
okay, 7:35. We have to stop meeting like this.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, George. I'm gonna end the recording, okay?
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.